it sounds like everybody's pretty familiar with Fortinet, but when you're thinking about securing an enterprise network, right, you're always dealing with the increased attack surface, wide range of threats from distributed denial of service to ransomware. A lot of enterprises are faced with the explosion of mobile devices, private clouds, public clouds, the lift and shift technologies from on-premise to data center. And the threat landscape is ever evolving, and Fortinet believes that the FortiGate, among other things that inside the security fabric, fit well into that landscape to be able to defend your particular network enterprise. So again, just a kind of a couple of quick high-level threats about that, right? Cyber criminals adapt quickly to the changing environments, like those that occurred during 2020. If you recall, there was the, among other things, there was the Colonial Pipeline breach. So, Fortinet also does a really excellent job of addressing that particular threat. IoT, enterprise edge, data center segmentation, firewalls, et cetera. So, just keep in mind that we're well provisioned in that entire cyber threat protection landscape. All right, cool. So again, what everybody's here today, right, is to discuss the Fortinet solution. And we'll be introducing you to the FortiGate next-gen firewall, right? Again, this is a central component to the Fortinet security fabric, and we'll definitely go into that as well. So, if you think about it, right, from a very high level, right, the FortiGate next-gen firewall, right, it enables the security-driven networking, including the security features, right? So think about it, right, within the FortiGate, it's well suited to also layer in not only stateful inspection, but, the ability to get very granular with controlling access through the firewall, right? So we have the ability to consolidate everything all with one operating system, right? So in terms of intrusion prevention, web filtering, SSL inspection, application control, advanced threat protection, right? So Fortinet at the end of the day has insight into over 5,000 different applications, right? So think about that as a way to be able to control access and to help reduce the attack surface, right? And what's kind of driving this, right? One of the big things that drives the efficacy of our solutions is the FortiGuard labs, right? So once you spin up a FortiGate, you get it connected to your environment. It's got internet access. It can connect up to FortiGuard, and that's the threat repository, right? That's where we have all our attack signatures, all our different applications, right? Everything that we need to protect the enterprise is all sitting in the FortiGuard labs, which is a huge, huge key point, right? It's back there. It's backing up all the networks and sharing that intelligence and that telemetry with all the different security sensors out there in the environment, right? It also is used to inspect traffic to prevent those attacks. We all do this at very high speed with the different SOC chips, network and content processors. And lastly, as part of the security fabric, right, the FortiGate can communicate with other Fortinet devices such as FortiNAC, FortiAuthenticator, FortiEDR, right? So we've got a very tight integration with everything Fortinet, as well as providing APIs and hooks into third-party solutions to help secure your environment as you enter into the next generation of network security. This slide just goes into a little bit about the actual portfolio, right? So if you look at sort of starting from the left, we've got our entry-level appliances, typically FortiGate and FortiWi-Fi 30 up to 90. So those are pretty well provisioned for small offices, maybe small retail stores, kiosks, gas stations, very well equipped. And the SOC-based chip is what's kind of driving the overall performance. And keep in mind, all of these platforms here that you see are well suited to drop right into an SD-WAN environment, right, with these SOC chips, these SOC 4 processors. We move over to the right, mid-range appliances, the 100 to 900. We start getting into the data center, small branch, small data center type of environments, pivoting over to the high-end appliances, the 1,000 to 6,000. So you could see here, it starts to scale very nicely with multiple network processors, multiple CPUs, SOC chips. So these platforms really are efficient in offloading content and to be able to process network transactions and security at very high levels of speed. And of course, we do have a 7000 series chassis series, which is another popular model for high-end compute. Just to talk really quick about this, the Fortinet security fabric. This is one of the big, you know, major attractions, if you will, to Fortinet is the security fabric, right? So it's broad. If you start in the middle, like FortiOS, right? Of course, it's one operating system that runs on the FortiGate. It's a very robust operating system. Those other three circles that you see, zero trust access, adaptive cloud, security-driven network, these are the other different security pillars that Fortinet represents. And there's multiple products and solutions that work in conjunction with the FortiOS to be able to secure your network environment. It's very integrated, as I mentioned, right? So we've got the fabric management center, which is up at the top, which is the NOC, which is the Forti manager, the single pane of glass management, as well as the SOC, which is the Forti analyzer, which serves to catch and correlate logs and start to review everything is from a security logging perspective and threat and analytics. And lastly, it's automated, right? So we've got self-healing networks with AI-driven security for fast and efficient operations, right? And we've got several hundred fabric-ready partners who have joined in to be able to work together with Fortinet and the Fortinet security fabric. I think this is a great slide to kind of go over too, is what's called the Gartner Cybersecurity Mesh Architecture, or the CSMA, right? So if you look on the left, right, this is something that was coined by Gartner. I believe it was late last year. But the idea is that it creates an architectural approach, right, to be able to promote interoperability between different cyber technologies working in conjunction, right? So if you look at the left, it's a good drawing, but there's a lot of points in between all the different technologies, right? Could be a little bit hard to follow, but as you start to look at the Fortinet security fabric, we believe that we've already been kind of in that space well before this was released by Gartner. So we addressed this, and it's something we've been doing for quite a long time with the Fortinet security fabric, right? And it's a simplified view, but offers the same level, if not greater levels of protection, right? And of course, FortiOS being right in the center of the sphere, if you will. Again, I like to hit on this, the 2020 Magic Quadrant for network firewalls. You see in the upper left in the leaders category. Great recognition, right? Fortinet recognized as a leader for 11 years in a row, right? So definitely not something to overlook, right? We're right there within the leaders quadrant of the Gartner Magic Quadrant. Just to kind of get into a couple of high-level use cases, and keep in mind, you'll definitely be getting your hands dirty with some of this in the labs. So, just kind of hit this at a very high level. So when you talk about, the first kind of use case is managing the external security risk, right? So, if you think about it, as time goes on, enterprise firewalls have been asked to do much more, right? With the explosion of encrypted traffic, TLS, things of that nature, HTTPS traffic, right? Most everything out there is encrypted. It's hard to even find, sites that are just running plain old HTTP, right? So the firewalls have got to be able to keep up and to be able to protect that traffic, process and decrypt encrypted packets, right, to look for those particular threats. And as I mentioned earlier, the FortiGate is very well suited to do that, right? We've got those different security processors, network processors, so that we're able to, offload and decrypt that traffic, right, on the fly, right, in a very quick, efficient manner, as opposed to something that's a lot slower out there on the market, right? So just kind of keep in mind the very high nature of encrypted traffic, right? You can set this up to encrypt and look into the traffic, but maybe exclude certain categories like banking and healthcare, things like that. So that's one of the key use cases, is managing all those network users hitting encrypted sites on the internet. This particular slide is one of my favorite, guys, right? Is managing internal security risks. I think a lot of times this kind of gets overlooked, but we call this deploying the firewall as an ISFW, an internal segmentation firewall, right? So if you think about it, right, a lot of times the flat networks, they're kind of weakened, right? Because once somebody gets inside the network, it's kind of access to everything. There's really no security in between, different security zones, PCI, things of that nature. So, the FortiGate is well versed in this particular, deployment model, right? So if you think about it, at the top of the diagram, you've got the next-gen firewall, the FortiGates, and an HA pair running on the outside. But on the inside, equally as important is that ISFW, right? And we'll get a little bit of a look at this in the lab guide, but it gives us the ability to create these internal levels of control, micro, macro segmentation, right? So we can still protect those workflows and in the inside of the network. So if there's a breach, right? We talk to a lot of our customers about breach. What are you doing for this? Well, deploy an internal segmentation firewall among other aspects of the network to be able to contain that breach, so it stays within the particular zone within the enterprise, right? So just kind of hitting that as a very high level. Another one of the use cases is using the FortiGates to manage the vulnerabilities, right? The majority of malware, the way it propagates could be based on user behavior, loaded macros that are loaded with compromised documents and things like that. So you can use the FortiGate to shield against the vulnerabilities, right? Manage the applications and OS risk with doing a form of virtual patching. So maybe you want to look at allowing or disallowing certain sort of rogue applications or applications that are deemed to be risky, right? To cut down on that vulnerability, right? Best of breed detection efficacy, right? So protect the network irrespective of the location, whether it's inside, outside, DMZ, et cetera, right? All while keeping very high levels of performance. So the users don't see anything while the FortiGate silently inspects traffic and protects the environment. And lastly, things like I mentioned earlier is the internal segments with that internal segmentation firewall, right? Manage those internal risks by inspecting traffic east-west. Very well suited for levels of protection from the FortiGate in that respect. VPN solution, right? Everybody's familiar with this, but you'll see this in the lab as well, right? Setting the FortiGates up as tunnel mode or web mode, right? So, as you guys are very well familiar, right? The new remote work, the work from anywhere is a new paradigm, right? With the new sort of environment that a lot of employees and customers are going through this way, right? So the VPN solution gives the freedom to work kind of anywhere and everywhere, but it kind of introduces certain risks, right? So what you want to do is provide that flexibility, strike that balance of providing flexibility with the remote workers, contractors, guests, right? But also making sure that that connectivity is secure and, not giving them access to everything, which is something that we've started to introduce as well with our zero trust network architecture. Okay, a little bit around the enabling of the actual, technology. So you'll go through this in the lab too, but you got the FortiGate, you want to start setting it up, right? Putting IP addresses on it. How do I get this device start to get into protect mode and, starting to enable communication out to FortiGate or FortiGuard and things of that nature. So we'll kind of step through that a little bit. You'll do this in the lab too, configuring network interfaces. Pretty powerful, but pretty straightforward, right? If you've got your firewall in NAT mode, all the interfaces effectively have layer 3 IP addresses, right? So when it comes to assigning that IP, you can put a static IP on, or you can drop it into, like, let's say directly behind a CPE, a cable modem, depending on if you're at home or in a retail store or something like that. It can grab that IP with DHCP or PPOE, right? And one of the nice things that I personally like is the interface roles, right? So LAN, WAN, DMZ, it kind of gives you the right level of options, right? So let's say if you had your interface in WAN mode, it's probably not going to have the option for DHCP, let's say, but LAN would. So it gives you that flexibility to customize the interface, but also helps you not, make mistakes when you're configuring things in different aspects of the different roles, right? And of course, in the CLI, all the options are available. So you'll see that as well. Routing, right? Routing should be at least one default gateway, right? As I mentioned earlier, if the interface is DHCP or PPOE, right? The gateway can be added automatically, depending on how you configure your device, right? You can also have the FortiGate, learn the default route from an upstream router, right? Redistribute routes or statics or anything like that. Fully functioning device. And keep in mind, the FortiGate's capable of hosting many thousands of, OSPF, BGP routes, things of that nature. So a very capable layer 3 device. A little bit about the firewall policies, right, which you'll definitely see as well. The main job here is to define which traffic is allowed to permit or pass through the firewall, and how do we take action on it, right? What do we need to allow and inspect through the firewall, right? Effectively, it figures out which traffic matches, how to process the matching traffic, right? When a new IP session enters the FortiGate, it's pretty straightforward, but it's very granular. You can see in the screenshot, right? It's got source, destination, source interface, things of that nature. And then we're tying in the security profiles with that as well, right? So you start at the top of the list and you look for a matching policy. And then if it applies a match, it allows it through, right? And then we take a little bit more computationally expensive analysis of the traffic, right, by applying that security fabric or that security inspection, right? So looking at IPS, looking at URL filtering, are we going to be, doing SSL decrypts and things like that? It's all very granular and very based on per policy. And again, this is a little bit more in depth around the security profiles, right? As far as antivirus, web filtering, app control, SSL inspection, right? So I always like to point out, like I mentioned earlier, with the application control, we've got access to over 5,000 different applications, right? So we can configure very granular application usage control policies. And we can also create filters around certain users that need access to certain applications based on the username and things like that. So again, the security profiles, you'll see this in the lab, very, very granular way to, put layer 7 inspection onto the traffic. Logging is very granular. We'll run through this in the lab as well. But at very high level, right? The FortiGate has 3 different types of logs, right? Event logs, traffic logs, and security logs. So, the traffic logs record the flow of information such as HTTP, HTTPS, and its response, right? So if you think about it, like anything that passes through the FortiGate is going to be logged, depending on how you have your policy configured. But we call this, forward traffic logs. Anything that matches a policy is logged, and it's forwarded through the FortiGate, right? The local traffic logs is something like, if you log into the management console, the interface, the traffic is going to be logged, as well as sending traffic through the FortiGate as well, through onto FortiGuard. And lastly, the security logs. So if there's an intrusion or there's an event that something was blocked for URL filtering or application control, that's all going to be logged within that security log setting. You can get very granular as to how you log and what kind of analysis you want to do on the logs, all from the FortiGate console. Authentication, right? So FortiGate's got very robust levels of authentication, local authentication, as you would imagine, right? Local username and password. So if you want to spin up a quick admin log into the FortiGate through the admin console, you can certainly do that, right? Remote authentication, right? Very common. Lots of customers do this. They integrate the FortiGate into Active Directory so they can query AD, LDAP users, TACAC servers, things of that nature. Two-factor authentication, right? Enabled on top of an existing method. So the key here is you just have to make sure that you have, you're using, LDAP or remote local authentication first, right? Then you can tie in, for example, FortiToken, and then you can prompt for that two-factor authentication, which of course ties into something that you have or something that you know. So in this case, a FortiToken mobile. And of course, guest authentication, user's account. You can set up a user account that will expire after a predetermined time period, right? So usernames and passwords can go away as the accounts actually expire for guest. Say, good use case here is for guest wireless. Using the CLI, you'll definitely step through this as well. When it comes to connecting to the CLI, there's a nice little CLI console within the GUI. You'll see this in the upper right. You can click on it and it'll drop you right into the let's say the root directory of the FortiGate, right? So you can start configuring and looking at routing tables, policies, everything right from the GUI. One of the nice things within the GUI as well is that you can, like, let's say you'll see this too, you can actually right click on a firewall policy and select edit in the CLI, and it will open up a CLI widget, and it'll allow you to, edit every single aspect of the firewall policy through the CLI for those that, love you working within the CLI as opposed to the GUI. Of course, you can connect in via SSH as well. And of course, you can always console in to the FortiGate and start configuring it. You'll see this too, the basic CLI commands using the config objects and systems, get information, get systems status. It's a great command that'll show you, is my FortiGate, which the hardware platform, does it have a local hard disk? Is it downloading the current version of the signature database? It's the current system time, things of that nature. Show the configuration, show me the routing table, diagnose when I start to look at troubleshooting, diagnose looking at, packet flows and things of that nature, and execute, right? So a very common command, execute ping google.com, for example. So execute those static commands that help you diagnose maybe what's happening with your FortiGate or get additional system information. SSL VPN, right? We kind of talked about this earlier, and you'll see this as well, but just the fact that we can configure an IPsec or an SSL VPN to extend the private network across the public network, right? So you guys will actually use this in the lab, but the SSL VPN, right? So we have two different modes, the web mode and the tunnel mode, right? So with the web mode, pretty straightforward, uses a browser to be able to connect into the FortiGate and get access to a certain level of resources. With the web mode, it is restrictive to, I think it's around 7 different protocols, but we have a lot of customers that use that, and for a quick access into the environment, it works, right? And then we get into tunnel mode. That's a little bit different. We use the FortiClient for that, right? So that's a full tunnel connection. So essentially, the users connect into the FortiGate, and then they get an IP address, and they can actually access many resources behind the gateway. The SSL VPN, we kind of went into this a little bit as well, right? So web mode and the tunnel mode, but again, a couple different granular ways to provide access to your users. Let's see. Yeah, I just kind of wanted to conclude that with you guys a little bit here. Again, you'll see a lot of this inside the lab. It'll step you through. I think there's 7 or 8 different use cases, kind of hitting everything that we went over in the presentation. When you start to look at the actual lab itself, let me just get into that here. Here's kind of the overall the network diagram here. Pretty straightforward, but you're going to be doing most of the configuring from the FortiGate Edge firewall here. It is part of the lab. It does allow you to connect what we were referring to earlier as the internal segmentation firewall, right? So creating a couple policies that allow communication through the FortiGate Edge into the sales network, outside the sales and finance network as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Most of the work will be done here. You will have console access to, I think these might be Linux boxes, the David and the Bob machines. And then, you'll have the data center network where you can kind of configure and make sure you have connectivity to the manager, that central pane of glass management, as well as the FortiAnalyzer. So once you configure like a working VPN, hey, can David VPN in all the way and get access to the FortiAnalyzer, for example, then it's working, that sort of thing.